Chair, we are now live.
Okay, good evening and welcome everybody to this extraordinary Overview and Scrutiny Commission meeting, 4th of April. Welcome you all, and we will do attendance and apologies. I have received apologies from Councillor Eggleston, who's being substituted by Councillor Penfold, Councillor Frost, who's being substituted by Councillor Brown, Councillor Mackenzie Boyle, who's being substituted by Councillor Allen, Councillor Watts, who's being substituted by Councillor Cochrane. Are there any other apologies? No. Is anybody joining the meeting online?
Chair, I will let you know who is online and ask them to turn their camera and mic on and confirm that they are present when I call their name. Councillor Thompson, I can see you're online. Would you turn your mic on, please?
Present, yes, thank you.
That's it, Chair.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest and party whip. Does anybody wish to declare an interest or note that they're working under the party whip? Agenda item 3, call-in of the Cabinet decision taken on 18th of March, discretionary rates relief policy for charitable organisations. As this is the first call-in at Bracknell Forest for a number of years, I thought it might help if I give a short explanation about the procedure this evening. When the Cabinet makes a decision, there's a period during which this decision can be called in to this Commission for further review. When call-in is triggered, implementation of the decision is paused until the Commission has reviewed it. The purpose of this process is to ensure that decisions are thoroughly examined and that any concerns or objections are addressed. The call-in process is an important part of the democratic process as it provides a mechanism for accountability and transparency in decision-making. The report before us relates to the call-in of the Cabinet decision in respect to the discretionary rates relief policy for charitable organisations. It met the necessary criteria, and this meeting of the Commission has been convened within the 15-day timeframe as set out in our Constitution. I intend running the meeting as follows. I'll invite Councillor Smith, who is the spokesperson for the councillors who signed the call-in notification, to present the reasons for the call-in and to outline the actions they would like the Cabinet to take. He'll have up to 10 minutes to speak. Commissioners may ask questions of clarification then to Councillor Smith. I'll then invite the Cabinet member to respond to the call-in. She will have up to 10 minutes to speak, and then Commissioners may ask the Cabinet member questions of clarification. Witnesses will then be thanked and we will move into the debate. The debate will be only between Commissioners and will not include the Cabinet member or the spokesperson for the call-in. Witnesses, unless they're asked to do so, cannot participate. Once we're in debate, further questions of the witnesses also cannot happen. So please be mindful of that. We have two options at this meeting: to take no further action, in which case the decision will take effect from this meeting, or to refer the decision back to the Cabinet to reconsider with our recommendations. This mirrors our normal process of hearing from witnesses, asking questions of clarification and entering into debate and making recommendations. If the Commission decides to refer the matter to the Cabinet for reconsideration, it's important that we agree what action we're asking the Cabinet to consider and the reasons why clearly. This must be based upon the evidence before us, that being the Statutory Scrutiny Officer report and its appendices, which contain the report that was presented to the Cabinet, a summary of the questions Cabinet members raised at the meeting, plus the debate before the Commission. As a Commission, we have before us the same information as the decision makers, plus benefit from their record of debate. Officers are here in support of the Commission, so questions of process will be, as normal, picked up by the Statutory Scrutiny Officer. In support of the technical detail of the report, the Executive Director of Resources is also in attendance. He can be called upon if there's a technical question that arises from the report. However, as you all know, officers do not make decisions, and so questions about the decision should only be directed to the Cabinet member present. Does anybody have a question about this process for the Statutory Scrutiny Officer before we commence? No? Great. So, Call-in signatories. As we said, we're going to allow 10 minutes for this. Councillor Smith, please present your case to the Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And my thanks also to members of the Commission. I appreciate you're all giving up a Friday evening to hear this, so thank you for giving it the time. We've requested this call-in relation to this decision as it is our view that the planned reduction in discretionary rates relief for charities risks a significant negative impact on the affected organisations. Whilst we recognise the substantial financial pressures faced by the Council, we believe that it is fundamentally wrong to seek to balance our books on the backs of charitable endeavours. Whilst the indicated £70,000 revenue recuperated to the Council is not inconsequential, this is a relatively small sum in consideration of the Council's overall budgets, yet could have a disproportionate impact on the activities of the affected organisations. I highlight here that we are not talking about profit-making enterprises, but organisations which operate for the public benefit, largely supported by volunteers, government grants and private charitable donations. We are particularly concerned that reducing rates relief may prove to be a false economy. For example, if it means that a small charitable organisation is no longer viable, then the lost social value may be significantly higher than the relatively small sums recovered by the Council. It is unclear whether the proposed hardship support would be sufficient to protect all such organisations or avoid undue impacts on their charitable activities. Whilst we recognise the revisions made to the policy following the initial consultation, it is our view that the final policy unreasonably penalises charitable organisations which may be based in Bracknell Forest but serving wider areas. For example, charities supporting beneficiaries nationally or overseas. We believe that such organisations are of considerable social value and are worthy of our ongoing support, irrespective of their focus beyond the borough's boundaries. We should be proud to host these organisations in Bracknell Forest and recognise the additional value they bring, for example, by generating employment opportunities within the local area. We also note that the proposed £1,500 cap on rates relief on a single premises means that even charities which do predominantly serve the local area may still be subject to additional financial burdens. The final consultation did not elicit responses on this aspect of the policy. We acknowledge that Bracknell Forest currently provides a higher rate of rates relief than neighbouring authorities. However, the fact that others are making poor decisions is rarely a good reason to follow suit. So far as we can see from the publicly available reports and the recorded discussion within the Cabinet meeting, analysis of the impact of this policy on the affected organisations appears to have been restricted almost entirely to responses received to the consultation. However, the consultation responses only appear to represent a very small sample of the affected organisations. In particular, we highlight that the policy will most severely impact charitable organisations with premises in the borough, but which are focused on serving outside areas. Yet no responses were received in the consultation on the final draft of the policy from organisations within this category. Further, whilst the decision has been open to consultation, we note that no detailed financial analysis of the effects of this policy on individual organisations has been presented in the Cabinet reports. Important questions which we believe should have been considered by the Cabinet have not been answered. For example, it is unclear from the Cabinet reports exactly how many organisations will be affected by this decision, how the estimated £70,000 burden will be distributed between those organisations, what proportion of their operating revenue this represents, or what the overall impact on their charitable endeavours is likely to be. The answers to all of these questions should be available via the Council's existing records or through publicly available records held by the Charity Commission. Their absence from the Cabinet report and lack of consideration during the Cabinet's debate is a glaring omission, which further supports the conclusion that this policy has not been properly thought through. Ultimately, we believe that this decision is wrong, it is unnecessary and it is short-sighted. For these reasons, we are proposing that the Commission considers the following recommendation: that the Cabinet reverses its decision and maintains the existing policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we will now open to questions of fact for Councillor Smith, based on what he has presented to us. I think I'll begin by asking, so this policy has come about after two formal consultations, firstly with residents, and taxpayers who've said they'd like to focus on local charities for local people. And secondly, with the charities, and you've indicated sort of limited responses, but what formal consultations are you basing your proposition on to determine this course of suggested action?
Thank you, Chair. It's not my role as an individual councillor to carry out formal consultations. That's responsibility of the councillors or organisation at large in making these decisions.
So what consultations? What forms the basis of your recommendations from discussions, whether they be formal or otherwise? Have you had?
Well, there's a £70,000 burden here that is being placed on charitable organisations. I don't need a consultation to see that that's going to have a damaging impact on those organisations. These are organisations which rely upon largely donated money. They're very effective with that money, particularly charities which mobilise volunteers. You know, it's important to understand £70,000 in the hands of the council delivers £70,000 worth of work. £70,000 in the hands of a charitable organisation which can mobilise volunteer labour will have significant more impact. So it's not just a question of where that money's going, but also actually the impact it will have, and the fact that fundamentally, taking this money as a council, choosing to recoup this money from charities rather than allow them to be active in that, is inevitably going to have a negative overall impact.
Sort of on that basis, why don't you think there was a particularly strong response or any sort of fundamental concerns raised from the charities that were approached through the consultation process then?
Well, first of all, I would say that I think there is. If you look at the consultation responses, they're pretty divided, even considering the fact that they're consultation responses from charities which by and large are not actually going to be affected by this. As I pointed out, if you look at the respondents to the final consultation, none of the charitable organisations which responded to that consultation were among those who are being affected by this. And even then, it was nearly 50-50 in terms of agreement and disagreement as to the policy. So even amongst charities not being affected, they weren't particularly amorous about this decision. And had we actually succeeded in receiving responses from charities who are affected, I'm sure that there would have been a more negative view. Obviously, I can't speak as to why those charities have opted not to respond to the consultation, though the fact that we ran two very nearly identical consultations on this matter in quick succession may not have been very helpful and may have led to some confusion.
Are there any other questions of fact for Councillor Smith? Councillor Barnard.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. So, one thing in the policy that the Cabinet adopted was this sort of idea, which is a recurrent theme with this council at the moment, around sort of a hardship fund and things like this. In coming to your view that this policy is essentially very damaging, because I'm sure somebody else will ask, did you have regard for what this might or might not do? I don't want to load my answer with what I'll say later, Councillor Smith, but you know where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Yes, I've acknowledged the hardship fund, as I did touch on it in my speech. There's not a lot of detail in the published policy with regard to that hardship fund, what sum of money is available, what the criteria for application to that hardship fund would be. I can only assume that the intention is that that hardship fund would bridge the gap, but obviously wouldn't completely balance the loss of revenue to these charities, which again, the fundamental question here is about the impact of this policy on the endeavours of those charitable organisations. A hardship fund that means a charity can stay afloat does not mean that we're not having a significant impact on their charitable activities, and that is my primary concern.
Any further questions? No? Last chance? Fine. Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Neil. So, Councillor Neil, welcome as well. Could you please spend no more than 10 minutes responding to this call-in? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I want to start by saying that I'm a supporter of the call-in process, and it's an important part of our constitution that ensures decision makers are held to account. This administration understands and appreciates that we have been elected to represent the views of local residents, and we are committed to taking decisions openly on their behalf, informed by their views. I welcome the opportunity to be here tonight to publicly explain the decisions taken at the March Cabinet meeting on discretionary rates relief. Having said that, while the call-in process is important, it does need to be used appropriately. This is quite possibly the first time it has ever been used at Bracknell Forest Council, certainly the first time in many years, so understandably that is a learning process for everyone involved. As the Cabinet member attending to explain the decision, I think it is reasonable for me to have an understanding before the meeting of the actual grounds for the call-in, the alternative decision that has been requested for consideration. Neither of these were clear to me from the call-in notice that I've been asked to respond to. From this evening, it appears that this is based on speculation on how charities work and not based on fact. I would suggest that the first stage of the process before the Commission meets is reviewed to ensure that councillors, having invoked the call-in, make it clear on what specific grounds they think a decision should be reviewed and what specific remedy they are seeking. Political disagreement with a decision is not in itself a justification for call-in. That is part and parcel of democratic decision-making in the leader and cabinet model of governance this council has adopted. The Commission may wish to look at this part of any recommendations it raises this evening. The decisions taken by the Cabinet on the 18th of March relating to the discretionary rates relief policy were driven by feedback from local residents and charitable organisations. They represented a key milestone in a review process that started last autumn and, subject to this evening's considerations, will take effect from April 2026. While no budget is easy, I've repeatedly said that the budget for 26-27 will be harder than we have seen before. Future funding for local government generally is not going to be enough to cover the rising demand for statutory services. Add to that the impact of the business rates reset and fair funding review that the government intends to implement next year, it is going to be really tough for councils like Bracknell Forest. We are a statutory body and need to focus on delivering statutory services. That means all areas of discretionary spending need to be very carefully assessed to ensure they provide maximum value for our local taxpayers' hard-earned money. Like all local authorities, our budget process starts in the summer, when officers explore initial options for consideration by Cabinet members and the administration in the autumn. With almost 3/4 of our budget being spent on statutory social care and waste services, where demand is always rising, the focus for savings inevitably is on discretionary services. One area of discretionary spending that has been highlighted consistently by officers for the past few years during early budget options has been support for charities, provided through discretionary rates relief. The previous Conservative administration chose not to take this forward as an option into their budget consultations, as did this Labour administration in our first year. It felt like a difficult proposal to take forward, and we were able to reach a balanced budget position for 24-25 without it. When it was highlighted again to me as the lead Cabinet member last autumn, I felt that I should ask for more information. I wanted to understand what organisations we were providing support to and how that level of support compared with other organisations. Not because I think we should be driven by what other organisations are doing, but because having a better understanding usually leads to better decisions. Interestingly, this aligns with the Liberal Democrats' response to the 25-26 budget consultation. They said, and I quote, that zero-based budgeting should be done in stages, starting with those long-running budget items which have not been reassessed for many years, and I'll come back to this. It was very clear from the information presented to me that Bracknell Forest was significantly out of kilter in its approach. Firstly, we have no actual policy position on discretionary rates relief. Our website directs organisations to contact Revenue Services, who will automatically grant both the mandatory 80% relief and 20% discretionary relief to any charitable organisation. When I asked why this happens, I was told that's the way it's always been done. No one can remember any different approach, and we have some staff who were working here before Bracknell Forest became a unitary authority in 1998. Our neighbouring authorities in Berkshire and Surrey Heath all have formal application processes against set criteria. Some of these are deliberately flexible, others deliberately restrictive. Some grant discretionary relief only if an organisation risks becoming unviable or if its reserves are low relative to its annual spend. Some restrict payments to a maximum value per organisation, others for a maximum period of 12 months. A common factor is that any organisation supported is seen to be providing a benefit to local residents and the local community. This is felt to be important because discretionary relief is funded locally. I reiterate, there is no impact on small charitable organisations, and we should not speculate on the impact on individual organisations. With Bracknell Forest having no set criteria or parameters for the relief granted, I discovered that we were providing financial support for a very diverse range of organisations of different scales. We have 5 organisations receiving discretionary release of more than £10,000 every year. Remember that this only covers 20% of their rates bill, so the buildings they occupy are very large. A further 11 are receiving support of over £2,000 per year. Even the lower figure is well above the maximum level of support available from some of our neighbours. At the other end of the scale, we have 13 small local organisations receiving under £250 per year. Having been presented with this information, my thoughts were that we needed to have an agreed policy to ensure consistency and equity in our approach. But I had no firm view on what this should look like, so it was agreed by the Cabinet that we should undertake a focused consultation to get the views of our residents and charitable organisations about whether we should provide discretionary rates reliefs and what our scheme should look like. Since any change would have an impact on the Council's finances, a question was also included in our main 25-26 budget consultation, although there would need to be 12 months' notice of any change. The consultation responses are set out in my written response to the call-in on pages 34 to 35 of the agenda papers. I won't go through them again, though I will reiterate that the Cabinet's decisions in March were driven by the consultation responses and informed by the EQIAs I've referred to. The response to the budget consultation from the Lib Dems touched on the discretionary rates relief policy. The group didn't make any suggestions on what the new policy should look like. They simply asked that the consultation is handled very sensitively and that nothing is done to lose the goodwill and commitment of organisations in that sector. Of course, we took that approach, inviting organisations to meet with me face-to-face to express their thoughts and concerns alongside the consultation. In the event, only 2 organisations took up this offer, but it was available to them. As I said at the March Cabinet meeting, the policy is focused on supporting local charities, helping local people, and Cabinet have listened carefully to the consultation responses, and the policy reflects that. It is less generous than our current approach, but still significantly more generous than what other authorities offer. We arrived at this position by taking a zero-based approach to an area that hadn't been looked at for many years, sensitively co-producing a new policy with input from charitable organisations, exactly what the Liberal Democrats said we should do. Looking at the national and international organisations that Councillor Smith seems to think are so important to Bracknell Forest, the evidence suggests that they don't feel the same about us. Not one of them responded to either consultation, despite them being well publicised and plenty of our local groups responding with their views. Why didn't the national ones reply if the discretionary rates relief offered by Bracknell Forest is so important to them as Councillor Smith suggests? The reason is most likely that the discretionary rates relief offered by Bracknell Forest is a drop in the ocean for them. These are large organisations, some of them with bigger budgets and reserves than this council. The services they deliver are not at all related to any decisions of this council, and they operate entirely independently of us. That's not to say that what they do isn't valuable, the causes are worthy, but the things they do are not core responsibilities of Bracknell Forest Council. As councillors, we are the custodians of public funds on behalf of local taxpayers. We need to ensure that every penny spent represents value for money, providing local benefit. I believe that the decisions taken by the Cabinet were the right ones to achieve that, and I hope the Commission will come to the same conclusion this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Neil. Commissioners, questions of fact for Councillor Neil. Councillor Forster to kick off.
The decision was informed by a consultation which included responses from a total of 6 local charitable organisations. However, based upon this consultation these consultation responses, none of the charities which responded to the consultation are amongst the most affected by the policy. These are charities which predominantly serve areas outside of Bracknell Forest and will lose the full 20% rates relief. Can the Cabinet member explain to what extent the impact on such organisation was considered as part of the decision-making process in the Cabinet that she is a member of, and how the views of these organisations have been accounted for when they have not participated in the consultation?
Thank you for the question. So there was one organisation who will be affected even after the protections, and they responded to the consultation to say that the policy was acceptable. The consultation was widely advertised, widely publicised, and we did receive responses from a good number of local organisations. You'll have seen that the majority of all local charities are unaffected. Small local charities serving local people are unaffected by the policy.
Sorry, the question I asked was, can the Cabinet member explain to what extent the impact on such organisations was considered as part of the decision-making process? One charity is not sufficient to do that. So could you just give me how you're bringing in the broader charitable organisation question into this thinking?
So as part of our consideration, we considered responses to the consultation from residents, who are the taxpayers who are funding this policy. We considered the responses from the charities who responded to the consultation. And you will understand that for every policy, there is an EQIA that is undertaken to understand the impact as part of the new policy. So we took the consultation responses from residents and charities, and then the EQIA provided the view on what the impact would be and whether it would be acceptable or not, and that is in the papers.
Councillor Barnard.
Thank you. I have two questions. The first is, of the charitable organisations that were approached as part of the consultation, how many of them received money from Bracknell Forest in one regard or another, or have a service level agreement or other relationship with us? Well, I mean, of the organisations, local charities, that were approached as part of the consultation, how many of them have service level agreements or receive any money from us as part of grants or other works?
So there are three strategic partners that we work with who are core grant recipients, and we have worked directly with those charities with through one-to-one conversations with them to understand the impact of the change of the policy and look at what changes to their core grant funding could be made to compensate. So
essentially, if I've got this right, if you are a partner of Bracknell Forest Council, discussions take place at a one-to-one level on how you mitigate the impact of your policy. And secondly, as I don't see responses for those in the consultation, is there an issue which is blindingly obvious to me that if you receive money from an organisation, you're unlikely to criticise them? And I've got a second question.
So the conversation with those charities did not happen until after the consultation had taken place. That was part of our decision making and as part of the consultation. And I think it's unfair to say that they are their favourites. They are core strategic partners for the services that Bracknell Forest delivers, some of which are including statutory services, and they support this organisation in its endeavours. So therefore, we would want to work with those partners to ensure that they are not adversely affected.
Right. So if I can then ask the supplementary, so let's be clear that they didn't respond to the consultation, but subsequently you had a conversation with them. Which I think is what you've just told me.
So all three responded to the consultation.
Yeah, and what did they say in their response? I'm trying to tease it out of that. Are they happy with the change?
Well, it's not a yes or no question. We had.
Okay. My second question is references made in the decision you took, which is something which this administration is becoming quite adept at, is to mitigate bad information. There's a hardship fund. Can you share explicitly with the Commission tonight on what grounds that you would grant hardship money to an organisation that was found to be in a financially disadvantageous position and at risk as a consequence of this, because this is a key plank of your policy, and didn't seem to feature in the response that you just gave.
So obviously we need to give 12 months notice to the charities in order to be able to affect this policy. So depending on the decision tonight, but the application process would be deliberately flexible for us to be able to review charities' individual circumstances and ascertain what support they need.
Sorry, I need to ask a supplementary on that. So at the moment, you're saying that we would have to take on trust that there would be an appropriate mitigation, hardship, whatever fund you say, to support this policy through, when actually that's a key part of decision making, but you can't tell us actually how this is going to work.
Councillor Barnard, I think Councillor Neil's answered your question. It's
with respect, Chair, she hasn't. I'm asking why, if this is part of the important part of the policy, it's not actually been clearly shared what this will mean, because as we're asked to take a decision that wasn't in part of a manifesto on trust, we're now being asked to take a slush fund, hardship fund on trust. I think we deserve an open, fair and equitable answer.
Councillor Neil, would you like to reiterate your answer, or
it's not for reiterating an answer, Chair, it's for answering the question.
I feel like you're badgering Councillor Neil.
I apologise in that case. I will ask the question nicely. Please could you elucidate and share with us what this hardship fund would look like?
So there will be an application process for the policy, which we will determine. And there will be an application process to assess the situation of charities through the hardship fund.
Councillor Forster.
Can the Cabinet member confirm whether the Cabinet had access to or aware of the following information as a consequence? Had access to and were aware of the following information prior to making the decision. Number one, the number of charitable organisations which will face additional financial burden as a consequence of this policy. Number two, the distribution of the estimated 70,000 financial burden amongst these organisations. Number three, the largest financial burden the policy will place on any single organisation in absolute terms. Number four, the largest financial burden the policy will place on any single organisation as a proportion of their annual operating budget.
Can we not do compound questions? Can we take it one by one? So let's start with number one, if you don't mind reiterating question one.
Number one was, can the Cabinet member confirm whether the Cabinet had access to and were aware of the following information prior to making their decision? And that was the number of charitable organisations which will face additional financial burden as a consequence of this policy.
So for every charity in receipt of discretionary rates relief from Bracknell Forest Council, we understand the impact of we know what they currently pay, and we have the reviewed the information before the policy was drafted, before we had scoped what a policy might look like, so we understood the current position.
So then, is the answer yes, you did know the number of charitable organisations?
Yes, and then for your next bit on distribution of the burden and the largest financial burden.
So, the Chair wants me to repeat it. The distribution of the estimated 70,000 financial burden amongst these organisations.
So yes, we know the impact of the proposed policy on every charity in receipt of discretionary rates relief.
So just to be really clear, you understand the financial accounts.
Can you address your questions through the chair, please, Councillor Forster?
Through the chair. To Councillor Neil, you understand the financial impact of this policy on every single affected charity, correct?
Correct.
That's a very contentious point I would make.
Not through the chair, not question, but...
Can I ask a question
No,
on that?
Councillor Forster, do you have another
Well, there's
question?
two more to go.
It was just on this, actually.
Oh, please, Councillor Barnard, please wait till
Well,
Councillor
it's
Forster's asked
actually in
his
response
question.
to that
I'll give
last
way.
question. Yeah, no, thank you. In response to the last question, is that information available to a private session of this meeting? Could we go into private session to actually understand what that looked like?
As Councillor McLean just pointed out, this is not debate. We're doing questions through the chair to the councillor. Councillor Forster, please continue. Thank you.
The third question was the largest financial burden the policy will place on any single organisation in absolute terms.
So we understand the change from what they currently receive and what the impact of the policy would be on each of those charities in terms of what they pay in business rates.
So in summing up, when you made this decision, you were content that you had a complete understanding of the financial impact on every one of these charities in Bracknell Forest. That is what I've just heard.
What I said was that we understand the impact in terms of what they pay in business rates. It is not up for us to determine their individual circumstances. But in terms of what they pay and the change in what the policy would mean for them, we do understand. Yes.
So in that
Through
case,
the chair.
sorry, through
Please.
the chair. In that case, can you provide all these details to the Commission, please?
Sorry, Chair, I believe that you should ask for advice on this to the Statutory Scrutiny Officer on this, because that's not information that was part of the original report.
Would you like to contribute?
Thank you, Chair. Just for Commissioners, obviously you're reviewing the decision of the Cabinet, and it's the papers that are in front of you tonight are the ones that you need to consider. So the witnesses can't bring additional information. It's really just looking at what you've got in front of you at the moment.
So if that's the case, then the answer is no. Because that's what is in the front of the papers that are in front of us. So it's not the case then.
Chair, just again, it's the papers in front of you is the papers in front of you. So if they're not available, if it wasn't available to the decision maker, you can't ask for additional information at this stage.
Councillor Barnard.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. So I'm trying to wade through this. So we have been given, Chair, a clear assertion that the Cabinet were aware of all the individual facts that relate to this. And I understand this evening it would be unreasonable for us to have sight of those papers. Does the Constitution allow us to suspend the call-in process to seek additional information? Because I would have thought this would have been information that would have been volunteered. I'm more than happy if the Commission needs to go into private session, Chair, through you, to ask the question where we can actually use some examples of understanding this, because that information must have been there. I'm not quite sure how to
I'll
proceed on
defer
this,
to
but I
the
think it's
Statutory
important.
Scrutiny Officer to answer your question.
Chair, so if the Commission does not come to a decision tonight, the decision will go into effect. So the Commission could choose to adjourn, but it would, in effect, be making the decision by default.
Can I ask another question then? How would we get hold of information which is clearly key to this decision and which has been stated in this meeting of having the benefit of this? Because it's clearly very important.
Do you want to answer that, Councillor Neal?
I don't want to answer it, but I want to ask that information could have been requested at any point throughout the process. This first went out to consultation in December and has been to Cabinet and has been out for consultation since. And with respect, I'm not sure that the detail of individual charities is actually relevant to the basis of the call-in that was explained earlier this evening.
Councillor Brown?
Thank you. Given the situation, just to be clear, is it possible that we can say that we'll go ahead with this, but we'll keep a weather eye on it and make sure that the hardship fund is big enough, or we could adjust if it appears disastrous? Because from what I've got in front of me, it looks as if consideration has been given from the largest to the smallest, and the largest charities are benefit most at the moment from what they're receiving, and we have to do something about this.
Councillor Neal.
Yes, and I'm happy to keep council updated on the policy development. Any applications for the hardship fund, and keep it shared and keep it under.
Okay, I'm going to go Councillor McLean, then Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Chair. I do have two questions, but I feel a bit like Winnie the Pooh at the moment because I'm a bear of little brain, it seems. Can I just be clear? Is the Cabinet member saying that they based a decision on information they had to inform them of that decision-making process that isn't included in the papers that have been circulated to us this evening?
So the policy was formed by information that was presented in. Sorry, do you mind just repeating the question actually for me? Sorry, just so I can be clear.
Of course. There seemed to be. I'm confused. Genuinely confused. In coming to the decision that you took as Cabinet member, you seem to have suggested that there was information you had that got you to that decision, which you've talked to with Councillor Forster about, that isn't in the papers we've seen. I'm just trying to understand, is that correct or not?
So in order to be able to form what the draft policy would look like before the draft policy went out for consultation, we did model different options as part of our thinking and policy development. And that's what went into the draft policy in February. And then we went out to consultation on the draft policy, and then the decision was taken in March. So there have been several points throughout the process where information could have been requested, but that's what I mean. We had the information to model the impact and understand the impact of the policy.
Thank you. Right. So my questions, there are two. The first one relates to Appendix A and Section 3 on Appendix A, which talks about the hardship relief. It does say in that paper, neither hardship nor temporary are defined and are subject to the Council's own interpretation. Now, I would have thought that that is unfortunately wide and perhaps subjective and not very helpful to people or organisations that might wish to apply for hardship relief. Can you perhaps reassure me that we are going to have definitions of hardship and temporary before anybody is expected to apply for hardship relief? That's the first question.
Thank you. And I just want to reiterate that this policy is not about penalising charities. This is making sure that we are making best value for money of residents, taxpayers' money, and we are supporting charities appropriately with the funds that we have. So by making the policy or the hardship fund, the description that you just made there, by making it more prescriptive, there is less chance of us being able to offer help. So the more narrow you make it, you know, you're really making it difficult for charities to be able to demonstrate hardship, perhaps. So actually, by keeping it broader, there is more chance of us being able to help more charities who perhaps find themselves in a situation where they need to apply.
You have a second question, then we'll go to Councillor Penfold.
Yeah, but that answer begs the question that in your preliminary introduction, you specifically made the point that the council, prior to you taking this decision and putting this framework in place, didn't have a clearly laid out policy. What you're now saying is that you're introducing a clearly laid out policy, but neither hardship nor temporary are actually defined in that policy, which seems to be an extension of what you were complaining about beforehand. So you might want to reflect on that, but I want to move on to my second question, which is under 6.10. I can't give you the page numbers because I think it's page 403. But you referred to the three strategic voluntary sector partners that we've got. Has any financial modelling been done in relation to the additional financial pressures that supporting those three organisations to compensate them, if you like, for the additional costs that withdrawing the 20% relief might impact them, because I think it would be helpful to know if this is, and you've talked about it's getting value for money for council taxpayers, that's fine. But if this is going to mean that it's an additional financial burden to support those three voluntary sector partners, do we know how much that would be?
So yes, we know the impact, we understand the impact, and as part of the conversations that we're having, then we want to discuss what they deliver for us. So as we said, we recognise that they are strategic partners for us, and they support and supplement or work alongside the statutory services that we offer. So this is an ongoing conversation with them to understand the services that they're delivering alongside us, and therefore, what they deliver. But we do know the impact.
Councillor Penfold.
On the surface, I looked at this motion and thought, charities, when I looked at the original proposal, I thought, I hate the thought of charities being given an extra burden. We do rely on them, as our three core ones demonstrate, but there are many others that we rely on. However, excuse me, I am about to ask a question. Okay. Sorry. What I was going to ask is, basically, once it has been decided, will all charities lose the 20% or will some lose less? And is that going to be across the board? And when the final figures have been reached, will they all have a chance to meet with you and put their case? Appeal, really, I'm saying.
So the policy that has been approved that we're discussing sets out what the policy is. So
they will, if they lose anything, they will lose the full 20%. Rate relief, rather.
So 70% of the charities are completely unaffected. So the policy is designed around local charities supporting local residents, as we heard in the consultations. So the small local charities, 70% are completely unaffected, and obviously the papers detail the impact of what the policy is for the other charities.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Forster, then Barnard, I think, had to. Yeah.
Can the Cabinet member confirm that she was aware of the impact of this policy on the provision of volunteer social services in Bracknell Forest prior to supporting this policy decision? What is its impact on the provision of volunteer services in this borough?
Perhaps you could explain social services. Perhaps you could explain which charities support social services.
I don't think I want to name a charity. What I'm saying to you is you're making a policy decision. I'm asking you that are you aware of the impact of the provision of services to this society, to this community, before you made this decision?
So as I said earlier, the impact of the impact on local people, the residents of Bracknell Forest, the taxpayers of Bracknell Forest, is set out in the EQIAs. So you know that the EQIAs form the basis of the impact assessment for the draft policy. And as I've explained numerous times this evening, we have gone through the modelling, the impact of each of the charities, the EQIAs, and we have considered in the round the impact.
Sorry, just
of
to
the
be
new
clear,
policy.
Just to be clear, you have provided, you've just stated there that you have done analysis on all the charities within the borough and provided sorry, what was the last part?
EQIAs.
EQIAs for that, correct?
Correct.
I can't find that in that level of detail in the material provided.
So the EQIAs are contained within the papers?
To the level of detail that you've just described.
Hello, Councillor Forster, through the chair. Please,
Through the
thank
chair,
you. 'Cause
I'm asking the factual question. Has she provided the material she's just stated in the papers concerned?
I think your approach is barracking our witness. So let's run the questions through the chair one by one. Let her answer and on.
So, to be really clear, Chair, I'm asking if all of the documents that the decision was made based on what the councillor has said have been provided in this for this process.
Councillor Neil, I feel that question's been asked and you have answered it. Would you like to reiterate your answer and we'll move to another question?
So all the charities that were significantly impacted financially have been impact assessed and contained within the papers?
With this in mind, I'd like to propose an adjournment so I could, as a commission, can discuss with the officers for advice about the non-provision of appropriate information and papers.
Stuart McKellar.
If I may, Chair, the Equalities Impact Assessment is a required document for any policy implementation. It considers from a resident perspective the impact of that policy. Now, it does not refer to individual organisations because it would not be appropriate to speculate on the impact on individual organisations, but it does refer to the services that the most significant ones provide within that EQIA. So from my perspective, who's involved in it, from the perspective of Abby Thomas, the Assistant Director who covers equalities within the portfolio, and Harjit Hunjan, who is also the Equalities Officer within Abby's team. We were all involved in that EQIA process, and we believe that it is a robust EQIA. It does take into account the potential effect of residents of this policy.
Councillor Forster.
A question to you, Stuart. Could you give me the exact paper, the page number, that all of that information is contained in line with Councillor Neil's answer?
It's in the EQIA, which is part of the papers, Councillor Forster. I'll find the paper in a moment.
Can we move on to Councillor Barnard's question while that page numbers?
Thank you. And mindful that this is, quite a challenging meeting. Please call me out if I, cross the line. But my
try
question.
Not to. Try not to cross the line.
Well, I'll try not to, and I hope I won't. But in the spirit of the passion behind this, we want this. So my question is, and this has come out from work with the local government association, that cabinet or stroke executive members, delete as applicable, when making a decision, should consider wider determinants that might go beyond the standard equality impact assessment.
Is this a question?
Yes. And therefore, as Rob knows, it's one of my questions. Apologies. So the question is, given that during the process of this discussion, through you, Chair, the economic growth forecast was slashed in half to 1% or possibly less, and it is known when economic growth falls, contributions and donations to charities fall and things like this, against a backdrop of rising costs, which are faced by national insurance increases, wage differentials, national minimum wage and things. Have those been factored into this discussion as well? Because they might not come out in the individual numbers here, but potentially have a significant impact on charities. And as there is no idea what the hardship fund will look at, is there a risk that actually we are missing the key point here, which is that charities are being clobbered at a time when actually they could possibly least afford it? So it's those wider determinants, about the impact on giving and things like that, that might actually affect those charities.
Councillor Neil.
If that helps.
So, with respect, there is a limit to the impact, the considerations that we can have with policy development, in that we can't consider absolutely everything as part of developing any new policy. But what we have considered as part of developing this policy is the impact on the charities that are currently in receipt of discretionary rates relief from Bracknell Forest Council, the appropriate use of taxpayer money, and offering value for money for residents, and ensuring that the policy and the discretionary rates relief that we do offer is beneficial for charities that support local residents, local charities that support local residents as informed by the consultation. I would suggest that any impact on local employment opportunities or economic development is part of the economic strategy and would not be considered as part of this.
Can I, Chair, through you, say I didn't actually ask about economic development strategy. I asked about the impact of increased employment costs within charitable sector and the potential drop in donations because of a weakening of economic activity. You know, this is one of the things that's widely shared when this happened. So it wasn't about economic strategy, it was about additional headwinds that charities face in addition to this, and were they considered in that sort of broader scale?
So I would just like to reiterate at this point that 70% of charities that are in receipt of discretionary rates relief from Bracknell Forest Council remain completely unaffected by this new policy. 70% completely unaffected.
And that wasn't specifically a question about the bundle we have in front of us. Somebody else had their hand up, Councillor Eberle.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Neal, I'm referring to Appendix C, which contains your initial equality screening record form, and I believe you referred to that earlier in this meeting. Does that contain the sum of all information which you have considered? Is it a complete and thorough record of the considerations which you have made? Or is there information out there which has not been made available to this group? Thank you.
So some of the information that we used as part of the decision making was presented for the February meeting when we put the draft policy forward for consultation.
Through the chair.
Sorry. Through the chair. Is that a yes or a no?
So some of the information was presented at the February Cabinet meeting when the draft policy was approved for consultation.
The question was whether...
Okay, I feel like we're going round in circles and she's answered the question there.
I asked the question whether here this is the complete information which is available on this important matter, the impact on our local community. And Councillor Neal has suggested given me a partial answer. So is it a yes or is it a no? Am I to interpret that this is a no from you, Councillor Neal?
Councillor Brown.
With respect, is this level of information relevant to the call-in that was presented at the start of this meeting?
Sorry, I asked you a question.
I've answered your question.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. How many, we say 70% of the charities are unaffected. How many in total are affected? Because I got a guesstimate of about 60 charities involved in this.
I think we're just going round and round asking the same questions. I'm happy if anybody's got a new question. No. Councillor Neal. Councillor Brown, do you have a follow-up?
Sorry, I did. Yeah. So there were. You gave us some figures earlier about the larger charities and how much, and so the 5 received 10k, 11 received 2k, and 13 received 250. But you've given pretty clear statements about how much these are affected, and you've given pretty clear direction about what will happen if any charity does find themselves affected. Do we actually need the details of those charities in order to handle this? We don't want to go down to individual charity levels in order to make a policy. We just need to scope it till we get the highest and the lowest, don't we?
Councillor Neal.
we know what we're dealing with.
Sorry, so you're asking for not individual details, but for what the biggest relief is and what the lowest relief is?
No, just that will we be able to cope with the highest and the lowest, you know, where every aspect of the charities that we know are going to be affected? Because did you involve called them the charities, didn't they? That didn't answer in the end. You tried to get them.
So the consultation was widely publicised and involved its supporters with communicating with charities to share the consultation and encourage them to respond. Yes.
It's just further to Tricia's question. Did you said you consulted individually charities. Was that after your initial consultation?
So we have consulted twice as part of this draft policy development. So we could, as I said earlier, we knew that we wanted to develop a fair and equitable policy, but we didn't know how. So that went out for consultation in December. There was also a question in the main budget consultation, which obviously everybody can respond to. And then we also sent the draft policy out to local charities for consultation on the draft policy as well.
And that was where you invited them in to consult if they had any problems. So good, thank you. That was after the initial draft of the policy.
Any more questions? I think we've given quite a lot of time, quite a lot of questions for Councillor Neal. Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Neal.
Just the point I raised earlier on.
Oh, yes, sorry, the page number.
No, she answered it. That wasn't the point. The point was to you, Chair, asking for an adjournment to discuss with the officers the point raised around the failure to provide all of the information that was necessary, that was given and used for the decision-making process in the Cabinet.
Should we take a vote on that? Oh yeah, we need a seconder. Okay, Councillor Barnard. Shall we take a vote on adjournment here to discuss with officers Councillor Forster's point?
Can I just ask on that, if we want to seek advice from officers, surely that's an individual right we have as councillors to seek that advice through an adjournment, because we're not actually looking at a decision-making process. I think it would just be helpful to understand this. But, you know, if we've got to have a vote and the answer is no, well, fine. I don't think there's anything
I'll invite the
mischievous in it.
statutory scrutiny officer to reply.
Obviously, it's open to the Commission if they want to adjourn and take private advice, but actually the right place really would be to ask me in public so I can give that public advice to the Commission rather than do that in private. But obviously it's a decision of the Commission Chair if they want to do that privately, but my advice would be to do that publicly.
I'll take your advice, statutory scrutiny officer, and keep this public and transparent. So, Councillor Forster, did you want...
We need a decision from somebody whether that proposal and second motion stands or not. Sorry, I don't want to be difficult, but...
Okay, should we take an adjournment, take a vote now on whether we adjourn in private or we take the statutory scrutiny officer's advice in this public forum? Please vote if you would like to take this to a private consultation with the statutory scrutiny officer.
Sorry, can I just speak to that motion? Because I think it would be better, as the statutory scrutiny officer has said, to have all this discussed in public, because I think it's reasonable, given the circumstances, for our residents to know what the advice is. I think My suggestion would be, if the advice we receive isn't clear or it raises further questions, then I see no reason not to have an adjournment to get more detailed advice confidentially. But if that answers Councillor Forster's question, perhaps it would be better to do it in public.
Yep, that sounds fair.
As seconder, I'm happy that we would adopt that course of action.
I would withdraw my motion if that was that based on what was said there by Councillor McLean.
Okay, let's take the advice in public. We won't take a vote on the motion. If it's not sufficient, then we will revisit this. Over to you. Councillor Forster, do you want to revisit your question because it was a while ago?
So the question I have is, it's become very clear in the conduct of this questioning session that there was information that was not available to us as a commission and in the papers that was used for this decision-making process. If that's the case, and we are not being provided with the same information, what does it render to the process itself?
So, Chair, the first thing I would say is that the papers in front of you are the papers in front of the decision maker. So you're seeing what they're seeing. I think what I'm reading into what you're saying is that had you been the decision maker or the report author, you would have wanted additional information. So
no, that's not it. During the conduct of the questioning, Councillor Neil inferred that there was additional material. I cannot find that additional material.
So just so
we're not seeing what Councillor Neil referenced.
So just to be clear, Chair, so I think what Councillor Neil was saying was that there was context that they were aware of through a process of consultations, and the final report was on the policy, and that information was the decision that they made the final decision on. So it's if you know something and it comes in as part of your decision making, it doesn't necessarily need to be in the final sets of papers. But so I think she's referenced the fact of there was a period of time of knowing things, and that fed into the officer report, and she was content that that was sufficient in front of her to make a decision.
Apologies, a follow-up question on that one to Councillor Neal. You suggested there was additional information which was presented at the February
We've closed the
Cabinet
questions
meeting.
to Councillor Neal.
I'd like to ask a question of the officer, please.
It's a clarification.
We've closed the questions to Councillor Neal.
Then forgive me.
Councillor Barnard had his hand up, and Councillor Barnard.
And can I start by saying I know this process is new and we're all finding our way in this, but through you, Chair, to what extent is it reasonable that information that is referenced in answers to questions is factually available? Because the concern is that if an assertion is made, and this is a broad assertion, I'm not talking about an individual thing, that can't actually be referenced, or there's no mechanism for the Commission to actually seek to source that information before reaching a decision, then surely that doesn't kind of help the transparency of this process. There's a lot being said about transparency. So, does nothing exist in the Constitution that allows an appropriate halt for that level of detail to be provided if it is deemed to be germane in reaching a decision, particularly as the equality and impact statements have different interpretations? That's all I'm asking. It's a very open question, and it's a learning process.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So members can decide that there's holes in the decision-making process and ask the Cabinet to review. So as part of your process of what recommendations you would make back to the decision-maker, you may choose to say that there were gaps in the process, or that actually you're content in terms of that process is fine. So I think what members of the Commission are asking may be something which wants to form as a recommendation rather than continue this sort of line of, well, we think there was something missing.
So if I can ask a follow-up question to that. So this is the first time round the block on this. And if in good faith we have collectively identified that there, potential, and I use the word potential, I'm trying to be careful with my words, potential impediments to reaching a balanced judgment and decision, and it's actually being suggested that we might want to recommend that there might be, potential issues with the process, does not the mechanism exist, therefore, to, for a week or so pause this process while we sort the information out, because it's a learning process, so we can actually come back and make a decision based on the complete information?
I don't think we can do that. I think we can form that in a recommendation to the Cabinet, but the Statutory Scrutiny Officer might have more to add there.
Just 2 points really. You can't. Well, you could obviously you could pause, but that would mean by default the decision would go into operation, which hopefully I said earlier. The other part is obviously while this conversation's happening, you haven't, as a body, decided anything. So individual views may be being shared around the table, but until you bring things to a vote, I think we're starting to stray into debate. And so my advice would be, if you're not content, this is the points to debate in terms of whether you want to go forward with the calling and recommendations to the Cabinet rather than process.
Councillor Brown, is this a question on the process to the Statutory Scrutiny Officer?
I wonder what's reasonable in making a policy when we know that we know the extent of the highs and lows, we know the absolutes and the proportions, and we've given all the information, and that generally...
Sorry, Tricia, I think this is more appropriate, like contribution for the debate when we move into debate.
That's the question, though.
Question about the process of the call-in.
You reckon?
We'll move it on to that now, and I'll invite you to speak first. So, thank you, Councillor Neal, and to Stuart McKellar as well for your answers, and I think you're free to step down. Okay, so we will now move into the debate section of this meeting. There are two options before us, as we've set out, to refer the matter back to Cabinet for further consideration based on recommendations we may or may not make, or to take no further action. So we'll now open debate to hear your views. I'll then take a vote on whether the matter should be referred to the Cabinet. If that vote falls, no further action will be taken. If the vote is carried, I will ask for recommendations to be tabled and what actions we will ask the Cabinet to take and the reasons for each recommendation, and we will vote in turn. I'll then adjourn the meeting for about 10 minutes to allow the clerk time to produce a decision notice for Cabinet with the recommendations and the reasons for it. The meeting will then recommence, and the decision notice will be shared on the screen, and I'll ask for a vote on the decision notice. So moving into debate, does anybody wish to speak? And Councillor Brown, I think you do.
I'll give it a go. Okay. So we're trying to make change a policy that is affecting a wide range of charities. The absolute and proportional financial effect has been assessed in those for the charities that we know of, and they've been given 2 chances to talk to us, and there are reasonable fors and against, but the point is that our team has tried very hard to, I think they've succeeded to make sure that all bases are covered. We can't know what charities will come along in the future, but it's reasonable to impose some sort of charge for towards their accommodation in the borough. We know that very few are affected by what's proposed, and we know that there is a way to help those who do find that it is a heavy burden for them. I don't think we should be sitting here looking at individual charities when we know what those effects are, and those effects can be managed. We can't make policy on individual cases. We have to be able to scope that to cover all eventualities. And I think this does it. I don't think we need to go any further into any further detail. It's totally unnecessary because that has been covered. The equalities has been covered. It's clear that there are some charities that are affected by this, but they can be helped as well by this. So I think that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Barnard had his hand up, and then Councillor Allen.
I think it was Councillor Allen first, to be fair.
Yes, having listened to a lot of the questions earlier, I think it's clear that when the final decision was made by the Cabinet, they didn't have all the information in front of them. So, because if they had all the information, we would have that in front of us now, which we don't have in front of us. So, if there wanted to be a recommendation to Cabinet, is that they reconsider the decision based on having all the information available to them when they make the decision, rather than just some of it which wasn't in the first, some of it was in the first tranche, some of it was the second tranche, some of it was February, some was in March. So when they make a final decision, they need to have all the information with them.
Councillor Barnard.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for your chairing, and I think also thanks to Councillor Neal and to Councillor Smith for participating in a process. It's the first time through, and I think it has thrown up some learning points which I'm sure we can take away and work on. Having said that, I think the first thing I would take issue with is it might have been that this call-in was initiated by Councillor Smith, but as a Scrutiny Commission, I think it's quite clear from tonight that most of us leave our party politics at the door and actually want to delve into an issue. And if we can tweak the process so we can do that, I think that's important. Now, going to the substantive issue in front of us this evening, as this is a policy that requires 12 months to bed in, and that there is time in this to do this, and given that tonight concerns have been raised, as has been said by my colleague and during questions others, that all the information might not have been here tonight to actually help ease us through this process, I don't personally think there's much harm in just suggesting, well, take another look at it on that basis. But I think there's something far more fundamental in this. We're being asked tonight to take on trust that in the absence of detailed information that shows detailed impact, that there is in the background a pretty detailed hardship fund type approach that will happen, that will actually ensure that no organisation it's not adversely impacted if they have significant pressures. And I don't think that has been demonstrated tonight. And, if you've got a policy where a key part of the recommendation is there's some mitigation, that mitigation needs to be set out. The other thing I'd say tonight is that Councillor Neal has referenced very clearly on a number of points that key documents were used to reach this decision. But none of those key documents are here, and it appears as if in the process we have that as councillors not privy to Cabinet decisions, that we're expected to know what to ask for in advance of this. And I think that kind of loads the balance against us a bit, because in any process, I don't think it's unreasonable for us to be able to actually have sight of documents which are referenced in a submission from anyone, and that would be the same for Councillor Smith as it would be for Councillor Neal. So for that reason, And I think as this is the first time through this, and commending my colleagues for bringing this call in tonight, I would ask that in the interests of transparency and in the interest of just going around this one more time, with the benefit of the questions we ask, that the Cabinet takes a look at it. They're perfectly in their right to reject this. They're perfectly in their right to uphold the same decision. But I just, Chair, through you, feel uncomfortable that because that information hasn't been here tonight, that there could be, to some organisations, an outcome which is suboptimal. And I finish by saying one of the key things that the LGA says when looking at the impact on organisations, you have the statutory equality impact assessment, but I think you do need to take a key consideration of the wider economic outlook and what that impact will be on charities. And for whatever reason, be it things across the pond or be it things more locally, the evidence would suggest that for the next 12 to 18 months, the economy of this country will grow less strongly than it did, and there is a direct correlation between economic activity and people's ability and willingness to donate to charitable causes. So I think there is a potential broader hit, plus the changes announced in the budget, that might not be taken account of in this individual decision, but could actually impact these organisations. So, and that's where the hardship fund matters, and I would have hoped tonight there would have been clearer detail on that. But no, I think it's been a good process, and I hope there's some learning from this. Thank you.
Thank you. I take your point. I think on the point of transparency, it's important to reflect what Councillor Neil said, which is there has been a significant amount of time and opportunities to review and raise questions, but this is
I mean, we don't
valuable.
know what, sometimes you don't know what you need to ask until actually something's presented to you to suggest it's been used, you know, with respect.
Councillor Forster.
So what I would say is there is a motion in this subject. Let's be really clear what this policy seeks to do, and that is to balance our budget on the backs of charities. That's what it is. And we should all remind ourselves that in this borough we have the same heart disease, cancer, dementia and other problems that large charities seek to ameliorate. So there is a reputational aspect in all this for our borough, and how charities view our borough as a place to invest in the future may be coloured by the reputation damage that this policy causes, and that's important to know. The second point I would make, and just reiterating what Councillor Barnard has said around, have we got everything? Can we make a reasoned decision? Because it felt that items were missing, whether I wasn't seeing the whole picture. But this is important because we are our residents' representatives. We need to be really clear that we know that we've seen the material that enabled this decision to be made. That's really important. The subsequent point I would also make is we don't really understand the impact on services, volunteer services in our borough. What does it mean for charities in every one of our wards? What does it mean to the people who volunteer and go to that particular charity to work if that charity is no longer there? What does it mean to the people that receive those services? That analysis has got to be done. We've got to know what this means for our residents, because that's what we're here for. And the last thing I would say is, and I'll reiterate the very first point, I would say we're, as a council, we're better than this. We shouldn't be seen to be taxing charities. It's not how we should balance our budget. The reputation damage is just too much. Thank you.
Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Chair. I came to this evening with a genuinely open mind, being prepared to listen to both sides of the argument as to whether or not this decision should be referred back to Cabinet for consideration. Not because I like the decision, I actually think it's the wrong decision. I think it's invidious to penalise charities, particularly given the other circumstances that other members have indicated about the financial pressures they're going to be facing over the coming weeks, months and years. But notwithstanding my dislike of this decision, I think I've come to the conclusion, having heard what everybody said, and actually I think this process is commendable to the council. And I think anybody who says local government is very boring and doesn't do anything, having watched this process this evening, will have seen that actually it is relevant, it is important, and it does matter. So I think everybody can commend themselves for a process well thought through and well conducted. But the reason I think it should be referred, or the two reasons I think it should be referred back to the Cabinet for further consideration, in addition to the other points that members have raised already, is, I think, from what Councillor Neil was saying, the decision appears to have been looked at in isolation. We have got a number of charities operating in the borough. We have heard that the environment in relation to the discount they get on the rates is more attractive than neighbouring authorities. I would have thought that positioning ourselves as a borough to attract organisations as employers and organisations that provide valuable services to local people should be something the council would be considering as a reasonable and sensible approach. But also the questions over the extent and the operation of the hardship fund, which have been made clear tonight, lead me to conclude that urging the Cabinet to rethink this policy is probably the right outcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Penfold, do you have a hand up?
It was just a comment about reputational damage. I think it might happen to some degree, but other authorities don't have reputational damage because they don't give the full 20%. Why should we? It's really just a comment. And if we didn't accept the cut in donations to some charities, relatively few, but what would that take the money from other purposes, so to speak?
Councillor Eberle.
Yeah, thank you. I was pleased to note that the council is considering zero-based budgeting. I was just not expecting that to be used to take it from the poor to give it to the middle class, quite frankly. And I find the whole project absolutely disagreeable, quite frankly. I think we need to look first to find other methods of savings before we take it away from the donations made by other people to support people in need. Morally, I find the whole proposal actually quite appalling. Excuse me. Coming back to the hardship fund, which has been discussed here before, we don't have one at the moment because we don't need one. The thing is, we are fair across the board. Now we are setting up a mechanism which is, say, by discretion. So you apply and you might get some funding or you might not get funding. I'm in that situation in my day work, basically, where funding is granted on a year-to-year basis for projects which some managers see deserving, some other managers does not see deserving. This removes any possibility of continuous working. And I think long-term planning is what all charities, like any business, needs, basically. So personally, I would also suggest that this decision is being taken back to Cabinet and revisited. Thank you.
Councillor Haverty.
Thanks. I guess I came into this with a fairly open mind as well. And I would say that I haven't actually been persuaded that we should refer this back. I'm quite happy with this decision as it stands. I've been at the budget consultations where this was mentioned, and I've seen the consultations where this has gone out. We've had lots of chance for the charities to feed back on this, and not that many have. So, you know, if they were concerned, they'd have actually done something about that. We also have our group's pre-cabinet briefings as well, where we get to see the information that's going on, and we get to ask questions. If there's information not there, we get to ask about it and get more details. I've had separate conversations with some of the cabinet members. I've had conversations with some of the officers about this. I believe this decision seems fair and seems just. One slight concern I would have would be related to the hardship fund, perhaps. Maybe let's see a bit more detail on that. But other than that, I'm happy with this, and I wouldn't wouldn't support it being referred back. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak? So we will now take a vote on whether the matter should be referred back to Cabinet. And as a reminder, if that vote falls, no further action will be taken. If the vote is carried, I'll ask for the recommendations that have been sort of alluded to in the debate to be tabled. And then we will adjourn to allow the clerk time to produce a decision notice.
I'm not a complete expert on constitution, but can we ask for recorded vote in scrutiny commission meetings? I've had a nod. I'd like to ask for recorded vote then. Thank you.
Okay. No. So we'll take a vote now on whether to refer the matter back to Cabinet. If you would like to refer this matter back to the Cabinet for further review, please raise your hand.
Sorry, this is a recorded vote, so we need to go name by name through.
Councillors, I will call your name. When I call your name, please tell me if you agree with the motion or not. Councillor Forster, just state agree or not agree.
Agreeing that it's going back.
Yes.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Eberle.
Agreed.
Councillor McLean.
Agreed.
Councillor Pickering.
Don't agree.
Councillor Haffergy.
Not agree.
Councillor Allen.
Agree.
Councillor Barnard.
Agree.
Councillor Cochrane. Councillor Brown.
Don't agree.
Councillor Presland. Councillor Webb. And Councillor Penfold.
Don't agree.
Thank you, Chair. That's 7 votes that don't agree and 5 that do.
Yeah, so motion carried, no further action. Yeah, so that the motion has fallen and there's no further matter for discussion. Thank you very much.
Can I ask now, not for a formal recommendation, but can there be an opportunity maybe at a future scrutiny commission to take some learning for this? Because I think, you know, trying this out in anger is a really good way of actually understanding how we might need to improve the process.
Yeah. Perhaps if in future we said which papers we actually hadn't got that we needed, which is exactly, yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah, we're going to close the we'll close the meeting now, and then we can have this discussion offline. Thank you very much.